Thus, according to Darwin, evolution requires that a system, including its subparts, be functional along each small step of their evolution to the final system. If this were the case, then the complexity of a system would easily be reducible. Yet one could find a subpart that could be useful outside of the final system, and yet the total system would still face many points along an evolutionary pathway where it could not remain functional along numerous successive slight modifications that would be necessary for its gradual evolution. In other words, subparts could perform other functions outside the final system, but the system itself could still be irreducibly complex. Thus, Miller and the video challenge mischaracterized Behe's argument as one which focuses on the non-functionality of subparts, when in fact Behe's argument actually focuses on the ability of the entire system to assemble, even if subparts can have functions outside of the final system. Two analogies will help explain the fallacy in the video. To understand how Miller and the video's test fails to accurately apply Behe's formulation of irreducible complexity, consider the example of a car engine and a bolt. Car engines use various kinds of bolts, and a bolt could be seen as a small subpart or subsystem of a car engine. Under Miller's logic, if a vital bolt in my car's engine might also perform some other function, perhaps serving as a lug nut, then it should follow that my car's entire engine system is not irreducibly complex. Such an argument is obviously fallacious. In assessing whether an engine is irreducibly complex, one must focus on the function of the engine itself, not the possible function of some subpart that may operate elsewhere. Of course, a bolt out of my engine could serve some other purpose in my car. However, this observation does not explain how many complex parts, such as pistons, cylinders, camshafts, valves, the crankshaft, spark plugs, the distributor cap, and wiring, etc., came together in the appropriate configuration to make a functional car engine. Even if all of these parts could perform some other function in the car, which is doubtful, how are these parts assembled properly to construct a functional engine? The answer requires intelligent design. All of these parts are necessary in my engine in order for it to function, and that's why it's irreducibly complex. Behe asserts that a system is irreducibly complex if the system stops functioning upon the removal of any one part. This is the appropriate test of Darwin's theory, because it asks the question, is there a minimal level of complexity which is required for functionality of this system? Clearly, my car's engine has a core set of parts necessary in order for it to function. The ability of an engine bolt to also serve as a lug nut does not refute the irreducibly complex nature of the arrangement of parts necessary for the final engine system in my car to be functional. Behe never suggests that subsystems or subparts are not allowed to play some other role in the cell. In fact, he suggests precisely the opposite. Rather, Behe simply argues that evolution requires that the total system must be built in a slight step-by-step fashion where each step is functional. When a certain core number of parts must be arranged in a particular pattern for a system to function, we have irreducible complexity, period, regardless of whether some of those subparts could also perform other functions. To offer another brief analogy, my laptop's power cord might be able to also power my toaster. But does that mean that my laptop does not have a core number of parts that are required for it to function? You can answer that question for yourself. The video's second criterion for detecting design is therefore also utterly fallacious. Finally, we'll answer the challenge and challenge critics to understand intelligent design. The video then claims that, quote, you, being Discovery Institute, have not pointed to a single gene that shows evidence of a non-evolutionary design, unquote, saying that we haven't discovered. To restate the obvious, apparently these critics simply aren't familiar with Discovery Institute or ID literature. In Darwin's Black Box, Michael Behe has described many systems with dozens of genes which, as they form irreducibly complex systems, show evidence of not having been produced by natural selection acting on random mutations and instead show evidence of design. Molecular biologist Doug Axe's research likewise studies genes that it turns out show great evidence of design. Axe studied the sensitivities of protein function to mutations. In these mutational sensitivity tests, Dr. Axe mutated certain amino acids in various proteins or studied the differences between similar proteins to see how mutations or changes affected their ability to function properly. He found that protein function was highly sensitive to mutation and that proteins are not very tolerant to changes in their amino acid sequences. In other words, when you mutate, tweak, or change these proteins slightly, they stopped working. In one of his papers, he concludes that, quote, functional folds require highly extraordinary sequences, unquote, and that functional protein folds, quote, may be as low as 1 in 10 to the 77th power, unquote. The extreme unlikelihood of finding functional proteins has important implications for intelligent design. Since Darwinian evolution only preserves biological structures that confer a functional advantage, this data indicates it would be very difficult for such a blind mechanism to produce functional protein folds. This research also shows that there are high levels of specified complexity in enzymes, a hallmark indicator of intelligent design. Only forward-thinking intelligent agents could find the extremely unlikely amino acid sequences that yield functional proteins. Axe himself has confirmed that this study adds to the evidence for intelligent design, stating, quote, "In the 2004 paper, I reported experimental data used to put a number on the rarity of sequences expected to form working enzymes. The figure reported is less than 1 in a trillion. Again, yes, this finding does seem to call into question the adequacy of chance, and that certainly adds to the case for intelligent design," unquote. If Axe's empirical studies are correct, then enzymes likely sit atop a virtual vertical peak of their fitness landscape, which are isolated in a sea of low-function or non-function possibilities within sequence space. In other words, there are extremely high levels of complex and specified information in proteins, informational sequences that would be highly unlikely to be found via blind trial and error processes of Darwinian evolution. This points to intelligent design. The video taunts Discovery Institute to name a specific gene that shows evidence of design. At the risk of dignifying this highly misinformed video, some of the enzymes empirically studied in Dr. Axe's work were those containing beta-lactamase domains in E. coli bacteria, such as the TEM1 penicillinase. So Discovery Institute and ID proponents most certainly have described genes that show evidence of a non-Darwinian and intelligent design. We've simply done it through a viable mode of detecting design, finding biological systems that contain high levels of specified complexity or irreducible complexity. This is the proper way we detect design and test for design, not inventing contrived criteria to claim that systems must be totally unique and perform only one function before they can be designed. Given that designers regularly reuse parts that work in different designs, and may even use a part to perform multiple functions, we can easily dispense with the video's uninformed modes of detecting design. The video opens by showing Stephen Meyer arguing that, quote, "When we find information in the DNA in this 4-character digital code, it's a logical inference and explanation to say that an intelligent agent played some kind of a role in the origin of these living systems," unquote. The video then challenges Meyer and Discovery Institute to provide evidence backing this statement, which is amusing since there will be no better elaboration on the scientific case for intelligent design based upon the information in DNA than Dr. Meyer's forthcoming book, The Signature in the Cell: DNA and the Evidence for Intelligent Design. This book comes out next month, and therefore the right question, which the book answers, is where does your information come from? Obviously, these videos' creators are not getting their information from proponents of intelligent design. Stephen C. Meyer, however, has elegantly explained that we know only one source of high levels of complex and specified information, stating, quote, "We have repeated experience of rational and conscious agents, in particular ourselves, generating or causing increases in complex and specified information, both in the form of sequence-specific lines of code and in the form of hierarchically arranged systems of parts. Our experience-based knowledge of information flow confirms that systems with large amounts of specified complexity, especially codes and languages, invariably originate from an intelligent source, from a mind or personal agent," unquote. For those critics willing to read it, Meyer's forthcoming book, Signature in the Cell, will more than answer the video's challenge. I'm Casey Luskin, wondering if any critic out there understands intelligent design. Anyone? Anyone?
This program was recorded by Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture. ID The Future is copyright Discovery Institute 2008. For more information, visit www.intelligentdesign.org or www.idthefuture.com.